Hello, my name is Austin Habish, the founder of Think Catholic, and you're listening to the Summa podcast, where we study St. Thomas Aquinas' Summa Theologiae in a way simple and insightful for anyone to understand. The Summa podcast is brought to you by Think Catholic. Taking 2 questions of the Summa a day, we'll seek to summarize St. Thomas's responses, discovering the brilliance of Aquinas. And his Catholic faith is day 143. So let's get started. We're covering today questions 50 and 51 of the secundae, that is, of the subjective parts of prudence and of the virtues which are connected with prudence. The translation that I always use in these podcasts is the one generously provided to me by Ave Maria Press, the 5-volume set translated by the Fathers of the English Dominican province, which you can now get at a discounted price from Ave Maria Press's site by typing in the code SUMMA10. And so here we go. Article 1, whether a species of prudence is regnative. Regnative derived from the Latin word regno, the rule of the king. Is there a special kind of prudence specific to the governance of the supreme ruler of the state? Different kinds of goods intended make for specifically different kinds of means, and therefore different kinds of prudence requisite to virtuously determine those means. The governance of the entire state requires a special kind of prudence, because it is to command the right means, which will, as much as possible, lead all the king's subjects to happiness, at least natural and hopefully supernatural. This prudence is called regnative prudence, the prudence of the supreme ruler. Article 2, whether political prudence is fittingly accounted a part of prudence. Political prudence is the prudence befitting the subjects of the king, men and women of the polis or the city. We are political animals, as Aristotle teaches, who naturally tend towards the formation of the state for the sake of our own perfection, our own development and growth. And since we live in a city and country, at times we will need to make decisions based on the common good of that city, of that country, and that is going to engage a special kind of prudence. Aquinas says, men who are subjects in any sense are moved by the commands of others in such a way that they move themselves by their free will. Wherefore some kind of rectitude of governance is required in them, so that they may direct themselves in obeying their superiors. And to this belongs that species of prudence which is called political. Article 3, whether a part of prudence should be reckoned to be domestic. To navigate oneself as a member of the family and with the common good of the family in mind is not the same determination or coming from the same prudence as that of the king in ruling the state or the citizen in being governed by the state and in governing himself in accord with it, or of a man pursuing his own individual good. Thus it is fitting that we recognize an additional unique kind of prudence specifically for one as related to determining the means towards the correct common good of the family. Aquinas writes, a household is a mean between the individual and the city or kingdom, since just as the individual is part of the household, so the household is part of the city or kingdom. Therefore, just as prudence commonly so called, which governs the individual, is distinct from political prudence, so must domestic prudence be distinct from both. Article 4, whether military prudence should be reckoned a part of prudence. There is an art to warfare, but there is also a type of prudence involved in finding and taking the best means to securing the common welfare through warfare. And insofar as this constitutes a unique kind of means and end pursued, it merits its own unique kind of prudence. St. Thomas says, military prudence may be an art insofar as it has certain rules for the right use of certain external things, such as arms and horses, but insofar as it is directed to the common good, it belongs rather to prudence. And there should be not only political prudence, which disposes in a suitable manner such things as belong to the common good, but also a military prudence whereby hostile attacks are repelled. Now on to question 51 of the virtues which are connected with prudence. Having first covered the 3 parts of a virtue in our last episode, which were integral parts, subjective parts, potential parts, then having covered the first 2 from that list between the last and this episode, in this question we conclude that journey with the discussion of the potential parts of prudence. Potential parts of a virtue are other virtues which are distinct in their own right and yet ordered to, or in some way subordinate to that virtue which they are potential parts of. The potential parts of prudence are virtues which modify deliberation, of the right means to take, and judgment as to which of those options is the best. And these are both ordered to right command, which is under the especial purview of prudence, and therefore they are called potential parts of prudence. Article 1, whether euboulia, deliberating well, is a virtue. The word euboulia means good, coming from eu in Greek, and counsel or deliberation, coming from bole in Greek. It is the habit of taking good counsel with oneself as to the fitting means to some intended end. And since it is a quality denoting a kind of perfection in man in relation to some specific act, euboulia is a virtue. St. Thomas writes, good counsel requires not only the discovery or devising of fit means for the end, but also other circumstances, such as suitable time, so that one be neither too slow nor too quick in taking counsel, and the mode of taking counsel, so that one be firm in the counsel taken, and other like due circumstances. Article 2, whether euboulia, deliberating well, is a special virtue distinct from prudence. And here it's useful to remember St. Thomas's description of those 12 steps in a human action, which if you need a chart, just send me an email at austin@thinkcatholic.org. After the end has been intended, before then commanding the means to accomplish that end, one must take counsel with oneself as to the possible means to the intended end, and then judge the best means to take. These being distinct acts from command, deliberation, and judgment, they can have good or bad habits attendant upon them. Euboulia is the virtue of good counsel or good deliberation, and the virtues modifying judgment we will describe in the next article. All this to say here in response to our article that the virtue of euboulia is distinct from prudence because it modifies deliberation, whereas prudence is strictly speaking about right command of the means. Article 3, whether synesis, judging well according to common law, is a virtue. Having taken counsel with oneself, next, one will need to make a judgment among those options as to the best one among them, as to the right thing to do. Synesis here comes from the Greek term for the man of good sense. So this is the virtue of judging correctly among these possible means according to general norms, what is called common law here in the article, what we might call the letter of the moral law. To give an example, and the example Aquinas gives in the next article, normally, or under normal circumstances, if a man gives you $1,000 to keep until he needs it back, when he asks for it back, you should give it back to him. This would be an example of just good sense in judgment or synesis. However, if between the time when he gave you the money and asked for it back, this man becomes a known enemy traitor of the state, then now, under these specific circumstances, one will need to transcend, in a way, the letter of the law, which doesn't adequately apply in this special circumstance, and reach higher into the spirit of the law. As an active enemy of the state, the right thing to do here and now is actually not to return the $1,000 to him, because justice demands, for the sake of the common good, that you not aid a known enemy of the state. That judgment, as under very unique circumstances and requiring judgment according to more principal universal laws, merits another virtue, which is our next article. But before moving on to that virtue, hidden within this article is a very useful quote on the virtue of prudence as such and as distinct from the virtues modifying right deliberation and judgment. St. Thomas says, "Sometimes after judging aright, we delay to execute, or execute negligently or inordinately. Hence, after the virtue which judges aright, there is a further need of a final and principal virtue which commands aright, and this is prudence." Article 4, or last article, whether gnome, judging well according to general law, is a special virtue. So, similar to how the habit of wisdom and the habit of knowledge are distinct in the speculative sphere, since wisdom is a judgment of the highest of causes and knowledge of that which is lower flowing from those causes, so too here judgment pertaining to the right course to take following general norms was the last virtue, synesis. But here, judging stemming from the most universal principles of the law, the spirit undergirding the letter of the law, is the virtue of gnome. And Aquinas' words in bringing this episode to a close, he writes, "It happens sometimes that something has to be done which is not covered by the common rules of actions. For instance, in the case of the enemy of one's country, when it would be wrong to give him back his deposit, or in another similar case. Hence it is necessary to judge of such matters according to higher principles than the common laws, according to which synesis, judging according to common law, judges, and corresponding to such higher principles, it is necessary to have a higher virtue of judgment, which is called gnome, judging according to general law." And with that, we've just finished covering questions 50 and 51 of the secundae, that is, of the subjective parts of prudence and of the virtues which are connected with prudence. My name is Austin Habish with Think Catholic, and I cannot wait to see you tomorrow.